Now look, I want you to sit with me for a minute on this one, because it's the kind of story that slips right past most people. And I think it tells you more about where the world is headed than a whole month of cable news shouting. It's the summer of 2026. Warsaw, Poland, a city that has been burned to the ground and rebuilt more times than any capital in Europe, has a right to expect. And out of the whole continent, out of all these old allies who have spent the last few years quarreling with Washington, sniping at each other, wondering out loud whether the friendship even holds anymore, there is one country that keeps getting the red carpet. One country that keeps getting the warm handshake, the weapons deals, the promises of protection. And it isn't London. It isn't Paris. It isn't Berlin. It's Poland. On the surface, folks, that looks like a simple thing, a friendly ally, a cordial relationship, nothing to see here. But if you look closer, and I mean really look, the reception Poland has engineered with this White House is one of the most deliberate, most calculated pieces of statecraft happening anywhere on earth right now. And here's the part most people watching didn't realize. Poland didn't get lucky. Poland made a choice, a very expensive choice, and it is being rewarded for it in ways that touch your tax dollars, your troops, and the shape of the next war nobody wants to fight. This touches the American soldiers stationed far from home. It touches the defense contracts that run through your congressional district. It touches the question of whether the map of Europe gets redrawn again in your grandchildren's lifetime. So stay with me. And there's a number I want you to hold on to tonight, a troop figure, one that's been quietly moving in the background, because that number is the whole ball game, and we'll come back to it before we're done. There's also a quieter question underneath all of this, a question about loyalty and who really pays for it, that I promise we'll get to. Hold both of those in your mind. Because here's the thing about a warm reception. Sometimes the warmest welcome is the one that costs the most. To understand tonight, you've got to understand how we got here. Because the chain of events matters, and it goes back further than this year. 9 years ago this very week, in July of 2017, an American president stood in Krasiski Square in Warsaw, in front of the monument to the Warsaw Uprising, and delivered a speech about the defense of Western civilization. The crowds chanted his name. It was, by every account, one of the warmest welcomes any American leader received anywhere in Europe. And that wasn't an accident either. Poland has spent decades understanding something its neighbors sometimes forget, that America's friendship is not a birthright. It's a relationship. And relationships have to be tended. Now roll forward. The war in Ukraine lands on Poland's doorstep, literally right across the border. And while other European capitals debated and dithered, Poland threw its doors open. It housed Ukrainian refugees by the millions. It became the great logistics hub, the funnel through which Western support flowed east. And in doing that, Poland raised its own profile in Washington to a height it had never reached before. Foreign Policy magazine put it plainly this summer, Poland's work in that war solidified how the American public sees it. Then came the elections. In May of 2025, Poland chose a new president, Karol Nawrocki, a former amateur boxer, a historian by training, backed by the conservative Law and Justice Party. He won a tight, bruising race over the liberal mayor of Warsaw. And this president made his very first overseas trip not to Brussels, not to Paris, but to Washington, D.C., to sit down with the American president who had openly endorsed him. Think about the signal in that. Your first trip abroad as head of state, and you spend it courting one man. And here's a wrinkle that makes it even more remarkable. Poland's president doesn't even run the whole government. In Poland's system, most of the day-to-day power sits with the parliament and the prime minister. And that prime minister, Donald Tusk, comes from a rival political camp, one that has genuinely tense relations with President Naraki. So you've got a country whose president and whose prime minister can barely stand each other, and yet on this one question, hold America close, whatever it takes, the whole nation rows in the same direction. When a divided country agrees on exactly one thing, folks, you had better pay attention to what that one thing is. For Poland, it's the American alliance. Everything else is up for argument. That is not. Every decision echoes for years, folks. What we're watching in Warsaw right now is the echo of a choice Poland made a long time ago. The choice to bet its security, its money, and its future on the American alliance, and to keep that bet on the table no matter which way the winds blow in Washington. That's the story underneath the handshake. Now let me be precise, because the details matter far more than anybody's spin, and the numbers here are genuinely staggering. In 2025, Poland spent 4.48% of its entire economy, its gross domestic product, on defense. Let that sink in. 4.48%. That is the highest defense spending as a share of the economy of any member of the NATO alliance. Higher than the United States. Higher than every other ally on that continent. For years, American presidents of both parties have stood at podiums and complained that Europe won't pay its share. Well, Poland went and paid more than its share, and then it paid some more. And here's where it gets pointed. Much of that money didn't just go to Poland's own factories. It came right back across the Atlantic to American weapons makers. According to Foreign Policy's reporting this summer, we're talking about roughly $4.7 billion for helicopters, around $4.6 billion for F-35 fighter jets, an estimated $10 billion in HIMARS rocket launchers, the same rocket systems that have been so decisive on the battlefield in Ukraine. That is American steel, American jobs, American technology, bought and paid for by Warsaw. But it doesn't stop at weapons. Poland signed on to a deal worth more than $25 billion with a consortium of American companies to build a nuclear power plant on Polish soil. And Poland has been positioning itself as a hub for American liquefied natural gas, American energy, flowing into Europe, breaking the old dependence on Russian pipelines, weapons, energy, nuclear power, three of the biggest lever points in modern geopolitics, and Poland pulled all three toward the United States. And then there are the boots on the ground. As of this year, there are roughly 8,200 American troops stationed in Poland, according to the Pentagon, though. And I want you to remember this, that number fluctuates. It rises and falls. Nobody promises it stays put. There are more than 8 million Americans who claim Polish descent, a bond of blood and family that runs underneath all the treaties and the trade. This is not a shallow relationship. It is deep, it is old, and right now it is being tested in ways the celebration photos don't show you. So let me put my analyst hat on for a minute, because the strategy here is genuinely worth examining, and it's more clever than it first appears. What Poland figured out, and figured out early, is a simple, hard truth about this era of American power. This administration does not run on sentiment. It runs on transaction. It runs on the deal. And so Poland made itself the best deal in Europe. It didn't lecture Washington about international norms. It didn't wag its finger about tone or temperament. It bought the jets. It paid the 4%. It signed the nuclear contract. And in exchange, it purchased something no amount of scolding could ever buy. It purchased relevance. It purchased a seat at the table and a promise of protection. And you have to understand why Poland, of all countries, thinks this way. Look at the map. Poland has spent centuries as the flat, open highway between the great powers of the East and the West. Armies have marched across it in both directions more times than any people should ever have to endure. It was carved up and wiped off the map entirely, more than once in its history. So when Poland looks across its own border and sees a Russian army fighting a war in Ukraine, it does not see an abstract policy debate on the evening news. It sees history knocking at the door. And a nation with that kind of memory does not gamble on hoping America shows up when the moment comes. It pays up front in cash and contracts and fighter jets to make as sure as any nation can be. That's not paranoia, folks. That's a country that has learned the hardest way there is what happens when the guarantees turn out to be hollow. Now, here's the rhetorical question I want you to sit with. Who actually benefits from this arrangement? Ask yourself that honestly. Poland benefits. It gets American troops and American guarantees pointed at a Russian threat it can see from its own front yard. American defense companies benefit. Those contracts are enormous, and they run through American communities. This White House benefits. It gets to point at Poland and say, this is what a good ally looks like. Why can't the rest of you be like this? Everybody at that table is getting something. But there's a shadow on it, because some of the very advisors inside this administration have been arguing quietly, but seriously, as PB's reported, that America's real long-term rival isn't Russia at all. It's China. And that means the smart move in their eyes is to shift American troops and firepower out of Europe and over to the Pacific. You see the problem? Poland has bet everything, its money, its security, its national strategy, on an American presence that some of the men whispering in the president's ear would like to pack up and move to the other side of the world. That's the fault line running right under the red carpet. Now, I want to be fair here, because this isn't about one party, and it isn't about one country either. Let me say something my own instincts don't love to admit. Poland's strategy, cold, transactional, buy your way into the alliance, it works. It genuinely works. For years, I've listened to people, including plenty on my own side of the aisle, argue that alliances should rest on shared values, on democracy, on principle, not on invoices and arms deals. And I believe in those values. But Poland looked at the world as it actually is, not as we wish it were, and it protected its people. And you cannot fault a nation that shares a border with a shooting war for doing whatever it takes to keep American soldiers standing between it and the tanks. And I have to be honest about the American side of this too. There is something uncomfortable about a foreign ally having to spend $25 billion here and $10 billion there just to feel confident we'll honor a commitment we already made in a treaty. Article 5 of the NATO Charter is supposed to be a promise, not a purchase. When friendship starts to feel like a protection payment, something has been lost. And that's a criticism that lands on Washington, not on Warsaw. Both things are true at once. Poland is being smart. And the fact that it has to be this smart tells you something is cracked in the foundation. So where does this go from here? I see three roads, and I want to be honest about all of them. Scenario A, the best case. The Warsaw model becomes a template. Other European nations look at Poland getting the troops, the deals, the protection, and they follow suit. They raise their own spending, they buy in, they stop the endless bickering with Washington, and the alliance, for all its friction, actually comes out stronger and better funded than it's been in a generation. Poland's gamble pays off for everyone, and deterrence holds. The tanks stay parked. Nobody's grandchildren have to fight. Scenario B, the muddle, and this is the most likely. Poland keeps writing the checks and keeps getting the reception, but the relationship stays exactly as fragile as it is now. The troop numbers drift up and down with the political mood in Washington. The promises stay warm but soft. Poland remains the favorite child of an alliance that can't quite decide what it's for anymore. Everybody muddles along, secure enough to sleep, but never secure enough to relax. And then scenario C, the one that keeps me up at night. Those voices calling for a pivot to China win the argument. The troops start quietly moving east to the Pacific. That number I asked you to hold on to, the 8,200, begins to slide one rotation at a time until one day Poland looks up and finds it has paid billions upon billions for a shield that's being carried out the back door, and a Russia that's been watching and waiting and counting those very same troops sees the opening. That's the road I pray we never walk. That's the confrontation nobody wants to name. My honest assessment? Somewhere between B and C, a warm reception that could stay warm for years, or could curdle the moment a bigger rival calls America's attention elsewhere. So let me pay off what I promised you at the top. That troop number, the 8,200, that's the whole story in a single figure. As long as it holds, the reception in Warsaw means something real. The day it starts falling, all the jets and all the nuclear deals in the world won't buy Poland the one thing it actually paid for. And that quieter question about loyalty and who really pays for it. Here's the answer, plain as I can make it. In this era, loyalty is no longer given. It's invoiced. And a small country on the edge of a dangerous neighborhood has decided it would rather pay the bill than gamble on a handshake. I can't say they're wrong. But here's where I land. And I want you to hear me on this. I've watched this country make and keep hard promises before. I've seen America stand by allies when it counted, through administrations of both parties, through cold wars and hot ones. Our word, when we keep it, is still the most powerful force in the world, more powerful than any rocket launcher we could ever sell. The question in front of us isn't whether Poland believes in us. Poland has put $25 billion on the table saying it does. The question is whether we still believe in ourselves, in the idea that an American promise is worth more than a receipt. So here's what I'm asking of you. Pay attention to this stuff. When you hear a politician talk about pulling troops here or shifting forces there, don't let it wash over you as background noise. Because for the people of Poland and for the American soldiers standing guard, it isn't noise. It's their whole world. Stay engaged. Vote in the midterms, not just the big years. Talk to the neighbor who thinks none of this matters. and remind them that the peace we take for granted was built and is kept by choices exactly like these. I've seen this country do hard things before. I believe we can honor our word again, but only if the people paying attention outnumber the people who've stopped. That's what I'm asking you to think about tonight. God bless, and take care of each other.